Okay, so you want to buy a Warbird, a real Second World War fighter, a Mustang, a Spitfire, the kind of machine your grandfather watched climb out of an airfield and disappear into history. You'd fly it on summer evenings, land, and let kids climb the wing. That is the dream. And it is one of the few dreams in this series that genuinely comes true. There are more privately owned Warbirds flying today than at any point in decades. The problem is what it takes to keep a machine from 1944 alive in the air. What one engine overhaul costs. Why every flying hour has to earn its keep. And what happened to the greatest Warbird collection of the modern era the moment its owner was gone. Start with the part that surprises people. This market is organized. There are brokers who deal in nothing else. Auction houses with Warbird departments, published price histories. Wanting a Second World War fighter is eccentric. Buying one is almost administrative, and the market comes in 3 rungs. The bottom rung is the trainer rung the machines that taught the fighter pilots. The T6 Texan and its cousins, honest, loud, brilliant to fly, and priced in the low 6 figures. This is where the community tells every newcomer to start, and the newcomers who listen are the ones you later meet at the top rung. The middle rung is the fighter rung, and its king is the P-51 Mustang. A flying, documented Mustang trades somewhere between $2.2 and $4.5 million, with Spitfires in the same conversation and often above it. That is supercar money for a machine older than most countries' constitutions, and unlike the supercar, the Mustang has been going up for decades. And the top rung barely has prices at all. The rarest flying originals, the machines with combat history, famous names, one of a handful survivors trade like art, privately, quietly, between a tiny circle of people who already know each other. But here is the #1 rule of this entire market, the one that separates it from every other machine we have covered. The airplane is not the asset. The logbook is a Warbird's paperwork, its provenance, its combat record, its unbroken chain of custody can be worth more than the metal. 2 identical-looking Mustangs can differ by a 7-figure sum purely on paper, which raises a question this community argues about at every airshow dinner. If a fighter was rebuilt so completely that almost nothing original remains restored around a single stamped data plate, is it still the same airplane? The market says yes. Mostly. The purists say something unprintable, and the answer decides millions. Keep that fight in mind. It tells you what this asset really is. Not aluminum. Story. Wearing aluminum. And the story is verifiable in a way that surprises outsiders. Serious Warbirds come with research files that read like biographies, squadron records traced through archives, wartime photographs matched to the airframe rivet by rivet, pilots' logbooks cross-referenced against factory serial numbers. There are historians who make a living doing nothing but this, and their findings move real money. A confirmed combat history can add the price of a house to an airplane. A broken chain of custody can subtract one. In this market, the librarian is a market maker. Before a 7-figure Warbird changes hands, somebody has spent months in archives on 2 continents, making sure the aluminum and the story actually belong to each other. Here is the first thing nobody tells you. When you buy a Warbird, you inherit a machine that was never designed to be old. These airplanes were built in wartime, by the tens of thousands, with an expected service life measured in months. Nobody at the factory in 1944 imagined their airplane flying in the next century. So, you inherit an 80-year-old airframe living decades past its design life spars, fittings and skins that must be inspected the way you'd inspect a bridge, because that is what they are now. Historic infrastructure that happens to fly. Then you inherit the engine, and in the Mustang's case that means the Merlin, one of the most celebrated piston engines ever built, a 12-cylinder masterpiece, and a machine that consumes money the way it consumes fuel, enthusiastically. The Merlin is not exotic because it's bad. It's exotic because the world that mass-produced it is gone. Every overhaul happens in one of a small handful of specialist shops on Earth, staffed by people who are themselves becoming historic artifacts. Then you inherit the licensing reality. Warbirds live in limited and experimental categories, with rules about how they may be used, and an insurance market that has exactly one question before any other. How much tailwheel and type time do you have? These are hand-flown, high-torque, narrow-gear machines from an era before forgiveness was invented. The insurer prices you, not the plane. New owners buy training, mentorship, and hours in gentler types first, or they don't get covered at all. And finally, you inherit the archive. The logbooks, the photographs, the combat record if you're lucky. Guard it like the deed to a building, because that is what it is. A gap in the paperwork is a hole in the price, which is why owners invest in the archive the way they invest in the engine. They commission researchers. They buy wartime photographs at auction because their airplane appears in the background. They write to museums abroad for squadron diaries. And when a new document surfaces, a ferry record, a pilot's letter, a maintenance card from 1944, it goes into the file and, quietly, into the value. The logbook is not a record of the past. It is a living document that still earns, page by discovered page. More than one Warbird has appreciated six figures without turning a propeller, purely because somebody found the right photograph. An airframe past its design life, an engine from a vanished world, an insurer who interviews you, and a paper trail worth its weight in gold. That is the inheritance. Now the good news. Because this is the one machine in our series that has learned to pay its own way. Because here is where the Warbird stands alone. It has 4 revenue layers, and unlike the tank and the carrier, all 4 are open to a single private owner. Layer 1 is the ride economy. People will pay remarkable money to fly in these machines, and organizations across the country sell exactly that. Trainer rides start at a few $100s. Bomber seats run higher. And a seat in a 2-place Mustang half an hour touching history at 300 miles an hour bills in the thousands. Per seat, per flight. The Warbird world figured out decades ago that the machine's operating costs could ride along with a paying passenger. Layer 2 is the airshow circuit appearance fees for flying displays paid per stop, stacked across a summer season that is scheduled a year in advance. Layer 3 is the screen. When a production needs the real thing, the sound of the real thing, the Warbird community answers the phone. Restored Spitfires flew for the film Dunkirk because no computer graphic yet sounds like a Merlin at full song, and camera-ready fighters with operators earn accordingly. And Layer 4 is the quiet one. Appreciation. Blue-chip Warbirds have climbed for decades. The fleet only shrinks. The fascination doesn't, and museums, foundations, and collectors keep bidding for the same finite pool of survivors. The airplane earns while it sits in the hangar on paper. Rides, shows, film, and appreciation. 4 engines of revenue on one airframe, and the busiest of the 4 runs on a calendar most people never see. The airshow season is booked, the previous winter organizers locking acts a year out, contracts specifying arrival days, fuel allowances, and weather clauses, because a rained-out show is a fee negotiation nobody enjoys. Between bookings, the airplane commutes, ferry flights from show to show, each one a fuel bill with a purpose, each landing another crowd, another fee, another line in the season's ledger. The film work runs the same way with more lawyers, insurance writers, camera ship briefings, low-pass permissions, and pays accordingly. By September, a well-booked Warbird has crossed the country several times and earned at every stop. It is the oldest business model in aviation, the barnstormers, with better paperwork. So far, this sounds like the best deal in the entire military market. Now, hold that thought because everything above has to outrun one single invoice, and it is the invoice that defines Warbird ownership: the overhaul. When a Merlin reaches the end of its permitted hours or makes metal before that, the engine comes out and goes to one of those few shops on Earth, and the bill for bringing it back runs to around $250,000. Listen to that again. $250,000 for the engine alone. More than most houses, and it is not a risk. It is a schedule. Every hour flown moves the airplane 1 hour closer to that invoice. Which is why serious owners talk about their engine fund the way other people talk about their mortgage, and why every one of those $1,000 ride seats has a purpose. The passengers aren't buying a joyride. They're paying the overhaul, one seat at a time. Now, flip the ledger over, because the overhaul is the summit of a whole mountain range of costs. Fuel first. A big piston fighter drinks avgas by the tens of gallons per hour at premium aviation prices. A wet afternoon of formation practice bills like a weekend away. Then the reserves. Disciplined owners bank money against every flying hour, engine time, propeller time, accessory life, so the $250,000 day arrives prepaid. Then the annual. An inspection performed by one of the limited number of shops qualified to sign off an 80-year-old fighter, with any discovered surprise priced in Warbird units. Then the hangar always, without exception. These airframes and the weather are old enemies. Then insurance. A 7-figure hull, flown low, in front of crowds, by a human priced accordingly, adjusted yearly, and contingent on your recent training. And threaded through everything, the quiet cost that never invoices you directly, expertise. The mechanics who know these engines, the inspectors who know these spars, the instructors who know these handling habits, a shrinking guild, booked out months ahead. In this market, you are not just maintaining an airplane. You are renting time on the last generation that knows how. The community knows this, and the smartest corner of it is doing something about it. Apprenticeships. The great engine shops now train successors, deliberately young mechanics, spending years learning the Merlin's temperament from men who learned it from men who fought the war. Museums run restoration programs partly as schools. Type clubs publish the knowledge before it retires. None of it is cheap training. A specialist takes a decade. And the customer base ultimately pays for every hour of it. But the alternative is an extinction event for the entire market. Every Warbird flying in 20 years will fly on knowledge that somebody, right now, is paying to transfer. That tuition is hidden in every invoice, and it is the best money this market spends. Which brings us to the trap, and if you watched our tank episode, you already know its shape. The trap is the Project Fighter. It looks like the smartest move in the market. A flying Mustang costs millions, but a genuine P-51, disassembled, majority of components present, fantastic winter project costs a fraction. The math seems obvious. Buy the crates, do the restoration, capture the difference. Here is what the market knows that the crate buyer doesn't. Warbird restoration is measured in years, commonly a decade, and in specialist labor billed at rates that reflect the shrinking guild we just described. The missing components are missing because they're unobtainable, and the finished cost routinely lands above what a flying example would have cost on day one, with the flying example earning ride revenue the whole time your crate sat in a barn absorbing invoices. If this sounds exactly like the tank episode's Project Trap, it is. It is the same trap, with wings, at higher altitude, and higher prices. In this market, the running machine is almost always the bargain, and the bargain is almost always the trap. The people who understood that best built the greatest flying collection of the modern era. And what happened to that collection is the lesson this whole episode has been building toward. His name was Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, one of the wealthiest men alive, and quietly, for decades, the Warbird world's most ambitious collector. Allen didn't just buy flying fighters, he funded resurrections. His Flying Heritage collection, housed near Seattle, became famous for something beyond money: standards. Aircraft restored not just to fly, but to fly authentically original systems, original methods, types so rare that some hadn't been airborne anywhere on Earth in generations, returned to the sky under his checkbook. Pilots and historians spoke about the collection the way art people speak about a great museum. Not a rich man's hangar, but a working archive with propellers. For the Warbird market, Allen did what Jacques Littlefield did for tanks. He set the benchmark. He proved what restored could mean when cost was no object, and every serious restoration since has been measured against that bar. And then, in 2018, Paul Allen died. And the Warbird world got the same lesson the tank world got from the same direction. To understand what was lost, understand what made the collection different. Flying Heritage did not embalm its machines, it exercised them. Engines were run on schedule. Aircraft flew on public flying days. Rare types filling the sky over Everett the way they once filled it over Europe. Because Allen's conviction was that a Warbird on static display is only half preserved. That philosophy is why the collection mattered, and why it cost what it cost. An airworthy museum spends multiples of a static one. Every flying day is fuel, inspection, insurance, and risk. It was the most expensive way to keep history, and the most alive. which made what came next land even harder. Because here is the thing about a world-class flying collection. It is not an endowment, it is a payroll. Hangars, mechanics, curators, insurance, engine funds, multiplied across dozens of airframes, a river of cost that flowed easily while its founder was alive, and had no source the moment he wasn't. After Alan's death, the museum closed its doors first quietly, framed around other events, then, as the years passed, permanently. And in 2022 came the announcement the community had dreaded and expected in equal measure. The collection was sold. Not scattered at auction, mercifully passed to new ownership with its own plans, but sold all the same. The greatest airworthy collection of its era could not simply continue, it could only change hands. If you watched our first episode, you have seen this exact story before. Jacques Littlefield's 220 tanks, dispersed within 5 years of his death. Different machines. Identical physics. A collection is a fire that one person feeds, and in this market, even winning ends with a change of ownership. The vehicles survive, the collections don't. The dispersal itself was conducted quietly, the way this market does everything important. Hulls that had shared a hangar for 2 decades crossed oceans in opposite directions. Museums bid on some, private buyers absorbed others. The community tracked every serial number the way genealogists track a family, updating registries as each airplane surfaced under new ownership. Nothing was lost. Exactly that is the strange comfort of this market. Every machine landed somewhere, insured and adored, but something unrepeatable dissolved. The assembly, the one hangar where all of them stood together, engines warm, under a single vision. You can rebuild an airplane from a data plate. Nobody has ever rebuilt a collection from a memory, which raises the real question of this episode. Who does keep these machines flying, decade after decade? Look across the flight lines at any Warbird gathering and the survivors rhyme. The ride-selling foundations are the backbone organizations that fly bombers and fighters on tour, selling seats at every stop, where every passenger funds the engine reserve and the mission funds the passion. The airshow professionals run 1 or 2 immaculate machines as performing assets, with sponsors on the cowling and a season booked solid. The museum with a mission model keeps aircraft airworthy under institutional wings, donors, members, volunteers, spreading Littlefield-scale costs across thousands of shoulders instead of one. And the syndicates. Groups of friends sharing one fighter, one engine fund, one insurance policy, and all of the joy at a fraction of the exposure. Notice the pattern. It is the same pattern as every episode in this series, and by now you can say it with me. The machines that survive are the machines with a job. The purely private, purely personal Warbird exists, but it exists the way a candle exists, beautifully and temporarily, until the first $250,000 invoice asks the only question that matters in this market. Who, exactly, is paying for history? The honest census of the answer looks like this. Members, writers, sponsors, and donors, thousands of ordinary people paying small amounts continuously so that a machine none of them owns can keep doing the thing all of them love. A membership card here, a ride seat there, a company's logo on the cowling, a widow's donation in a veteran's name. History, it turns out, survives as a subscription service collected $40 at a time at airshow gates, aggregated into engine funds, dispersed $250,000 at a time to the last shops on Earth that know the work. It is the most distributed ownership model in this entire series, and the only one that has never once failed a Mustang. So, does owning a Warbird actually work? Here is the good year. You own a documented Mustang with clean logbooks and a mid-time engine. It flew a full airshow season at real appearance fees. The ride weekends sold every seat, and every seat fed the engine fund. A streaming production booked it for 10 days because nothing else sounds like it. And in December, the market values it higher than it did in January, because flying, documented Mustangs always are. The machine covered its costs, paid you, and appreciated, all while being the most beautiful thing at every airfield it touched. That year is real. It happens every summer. Now here is the other year. You bought the project. The crates arrived with less inside than the listing implied. The one shop qualified for the work quoted a number with too many digits and a start date 2 years out. The engine you were told was fresh turned out to be fresh in 1996. 7 years in, you have spent more than a flying Mustang costs, and what you own is still, legally and physically, luggage. That year is also real, and Warbird hangars across the world hold its evidence in crates, under dust sheets, with faded ambitions stenciled on the side. Same dream, same airplane, technically. The difference was never the machine. It was whether the buyer understood that in this market, you don't purchase a Warbird, you audition to maintain one. Because that is the truth under all of it. Every Warbird flying today is airborne for one reason only. Somebody, right now, is paying for it to be. The factories are gone, the war is gone. The generation that built them is nearly gone. What remains is a covenant, an unbroken chain of people who each held the stick for a while, paid the bills, guarded the logbooks, and passed the machine on. That is what you're really buying at that auction. Not an airplane. A place in the chain. Warbirds don't have owners. They have caretakers holding history between auctions.